You really shouldn't be here, Frank. This isn't your house anymore. It's mine." Those words cut deeper than any knife in the world, and they came from my own son-in-law, Eric, right there at the dinner table. I had built that dining room, with my own hands 25 years ago, poured sweat and love into every plank, every nail. And now, sitting across from me, he smirked like I was the intruder in my own home. I'm Frank Donnelly. I'm 72 years old, born and raised in Cedar Falls, Iowa, a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business. I worked as a carpenter my whole life, fixed every roof and built every deck for the neighbors who could afford it, and yet somehow, my own family never seemed to see the sacrifices I made for them. I wasn't rich, but I owned my house, my car, and my pride. Or at least I thought I did. The night started like any other Sunday family dinner. My daughter Megan had begged me to come over. She said it was just a casual evening. Nothing formal. I should have known better. When I walked into their McKinley Drive home, I felt the weight of the stairs. Not the casual greetings of family, but the thinly veiled judgment of people who thought they were entitled to my life, my home, my everything. Eric carved into the roast with exaggerated precision, not looking at anyone, not even Megan. He was 35, tall, athletic, and full. Of that kind of overconfidence you can only develop when people have never had to work for anything real in their lives. "You know," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "it's weird having someone around who doesn't really belong here anymore. Kind of uncomfortable, honestly." I froze. The room got quiet. Megan's eyes darted down to her plate, chewing nervously. I could smell the roast, perfectly seasoned, but it made no difference. Nothing could mask the sting of humiliation. And then I heard it again, the line that would echo in my mind for weeks. "Frank, you're just dead weight now. Maybe it's time to step aside, huh?" Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. I could have lost my temper. I could have yelled, stormed out, or thrown the roast at him. But I didn't. I sat there, quiet, my hands folded over the tablecloth, feeling the humiliation build like a storm cloud over my head. There's something about being belittled in your own home, by the people you helped raise, by the people who owe everything to you, that changes a man. Backstory. I had spent 30 years raising Megan on my own, after her mother walked out when Megan was just 6. I worked double shifts, saved every dollar, and somehow kept a roof over our heads in Cedar Falls. The house wasn't just a place to live, it was a symbol of every sacrifice, every late-night shift, every scraped knuckle from hammering nails into cold Iowa wood. And now it felt like it was being ripped away with nothing more than words and smug smiles. Eric didn't stop. He laughed when Megan passed him the mashed potatoes. "Dad's so old-fashioned," he said. "Still thinks money grows on trees. Honestly, this place could use some modern updates, don't you think? Frank wouldn't know where to start." I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell him he was a fool, that he had no idea about life, about struggle, about the blood and tears that had built this family home. But I stayed quiet, calm. I reminded myself that revenge is most satisfying when it's silent at first, when it's waiting, growing, building power under the surface. Megan glanced at me once, a fleeting look of guilt or fear. I couldn't tell which. I kept my gaze fixed on the roast in front of me, pretending to cut a slice, while inside every nerve screamed. That night, I left early, not because I was afraid, but because the first step in taking back what's yours is knowing exactly what you're up against. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't just about dinner. This was about the house, the legacy, the respect that had been stripped from me with a few careless words. As I drove home, the cold Iowa wind slapping against the windows of my old Chevy Silverado, I realized something. Revenge wouldn't just be satisfying, it would be poetic justice. And it would be mine. Because Eric didn't just insult me, he underestimated me. And that, my friends, is the first mistake anyone makes when they think they can destroy a man who's spent a lifetime building more than just walls. They've built resilience, patience, and the quiet fire that burns the longest. And that fire was just beginning to glow. The next Sunday, I got an unspoken confirmation that the storm wasn't over. I stopped by my daughter's house to pick up Megan for lunch. Her car broke down, she said. When I arrived, Eric opened the door with that same smirk, holding a set of car keys like he owned the world. "Dad," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "I thought you'd gone already. You know, it's awkward when you just hang around." "Eric," I said calmly, "I'm here for Megan. She asked me to come." He laughed, that high-pitched, mocking laugh, the one that made your stomach sink because it carried all the entitlement of someone who'd never earned a day of hard work in their life. Sure, but, you know, it's just a little weird. She could call a cab, right?" Megan didn't speak. She shuffled to the kitchen, avoiding both of us. I could tell she was embarrassed. And I hated seeing that. I hated seeing her caught between her husband and me. But worse, I hated the realization that this wasn't just casual disrespect. It was a deliberate campaign. Inside, I tried small. Talk with Megan while Eric hovered nearby, sipping his overpriced latte from a local Cedar Falls cafe. "So, Dad," he said suddenly, leaning over the counter, "are you still keeping that old house on Maple Street? I heard property taxes are a nightmare these days." I froze. Property taxes. That was a loaded topic. The house wasn't just old. It was mine, in every sense the law recognized. But Eric didn't care about law or ownership. He cared about humiliation. "You might want to think about downsizing," he continued, smirking. "Wouldn't want you stuck in that place forever, would you?" I clenched my jaw. I wanted to tell him off, but instead, I let him continue, letting his arrogance fuel the fire that had been growing inside me since last Sunday. Over lunch, the insults didn't stop. Megan tried to redirect the conversation, talking about the weather, the small-town fair coming up, but Eric interjected at every turn. "You know, Dad," he said, cutting her off, "it's really amazing you still manage to function at your age. I mean, it must be exhausting, right? To keep up with things you probably don't even understand anymore?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who thought he had conquered life by marrying into it. He had no idea what I'd endured. Raising a daughter alone, working 2 jobs for decades, dealing with broken plumbing at midnight, helping the neighbors fix their porches while still putting food on the table for my own kid. All of that? Invisible. Erased by a smirk and a sentence. I said nothing. Calm, collected, like a predator waiting for the right moment. Silence, after all, can be more terrifying than any argument. After lunch, Eric insisted on driving Megan back. Home. I walked behind them, feeling the chilly Iowa wind against my face, trying not to show how every word stung. And then I overheard him on the porch, speaking to Megan in a tone meant for me, even though he thought I wasn't listening. "Honestly," he said, "it's only a matter of time before your dad realizes he doesn't belong here anymore. He's lucky we even let him come around." One more wrong move and, well, you know, that word, lucky, gnawed at me. Lucky? I built my daughter's life. I built the house she lives in. And now I was expected to feel lucky for being tolerated? I walked back to my car, every nerve buzzing. By the time I reached Maple Street, the fog rolling off the Iowa River seemed almost symbolic. Thick, cold, and blinding, but clearing eventually, just like the storm I was about to unleash. Over the next few days, I made calls. Lawyers, old friends, former clients. I wanted to understand exactly how far Eric thought he could push me. I discovered something crucial. The mortgage on the house wasn't in Megan's name. It was in mine. Every payment, every deed, every legal document pointed to one fact. I still owned that property. It was like a switch had flipped inside me. I didn't feel anger, not exactly. I felt the calm, deliberate certainty of a man who had been underestimated for far too long. This wasn't about revenge yet. It was about reclaiming what was mine, quietly, deliberately, legally. And when the time came, Eric would see that the man he mocked was not just a relic of the past. I was a force to be reckoned with. That night, I sat in my workshop, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil filling the room. I traced my hands over the beams I had built decades ago. Memories flashed. Megan learning to ride her bike in the yard, fixing a broken fence in the summer sun, winters shoveling snow off the driveway while my muscles ached. And I realized this house wasn't just wood and nails. It was life. And no one, not Eric, not Megan, not anyone, would take that away without consequence. I smiled faintly, a slow, measured smile. Revenge, when done right, is beautiful. And mine was only beginning. I spent the next few days doing what I do best, observing, calculating, and quietly gathering every piece of information I could. Revenge isn't about yelling or throwing tantrums. It's about patience, precision, and timing. And Cedar Falls, with its small-town gossip and tight-knit community, provided the perfect stage. I started at the town hall, pulling up the property. Records. I confirmed everything I already suspected. The Maple Street house was fully in my name. Every mortgage payment, every insurance policy, every tax receipt, all traced back to me. Legally, Eric and Megan had no claim. None. Next, I called my old lawyer, Thomas Reynolds. He'd been handling my paperwork since I bought the house 30 years ago. A grizzled man with a knack for reading between the lines of contracts and wills. I explained the situation, the insults, the constant humiliation, and the fact that my family seemed ready to erase me from my own life. Thomas didn't need to hear more. He understood. "Frank," he said, his voice low but firm, "they've overstepped. You're entitled to reclaim control, and legally you have every right to do it. But it has to be done smart. No slip-ups. One misstep, and they'll twist it against you." I nodded. That was exactly what I needed. A plan. I spent the evening drafting a careful strategy. First, I'd quietly assume full control of the mortgage, making every payment from my account. Not a word to anyone. I wanted to watch Eric squirm when he realized that every penny he thought he owned was tied to me. Next, I planned to gather small-town allies, neighbors, local bankers, the handyman who owed me a favor, anyone who could provide subtle support. In a town like Cedar Falls, whispers travel faster than social media. I even reached out to a retired bank manager, Henry Collins, who still had ties to the local mortgage office. "Frank," he said over the phone, chuckling softly, "you always had a head for this. Just make sure you cover your tracks, and Eric won't know what hit him. I smiled. Covering my tracks? Yes, this was going to be fun. Over the next week, I subtly infiltrated their daily life. I made small, seemingly innocent calls, checking the mortgage account, verifying insurance payments, and ensuring the house remained fully in my name. Every interaction was calm, professional, invisible. Meanwhile, Eric continued his subtle provocations, laughing at my age, making offhand comments about my old-fashioned ways, and questioning my ability to manage property. But this time, I was untouchable. One evening, Megan called. Her voice was strained. "Dad, Eric said some things about you. I think he might be planning something. I didn't want to tell you because he gets so angry, but—" I cut her off gently. "Megan, relax. Whatever he's thinking, I've got it covered. Let him underestimate me. That's his mistake." Her voice wavered. "But Dad, it feels like you're fighting alone." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I'm never alone. Remember, patience is stronger than anger. Just wait. You'll see." The following Sunday, I attended one of the small-town community meetings at the Cedar Falls Community Center. Eric and Megan were there too, sitting smugly in the back. As the meeting dragged on, Eric made subtle digs at me, commenting on my age, my methods, and the old-fashioned house I owned. But I stayed silent. Calm. Observing. Every smirk, every laugh, every whisper of mockery was being catalogued in my mind. By the time the meeting ended, I knew exactly how to proceed. First, I would make a quiet, legal claim to ensure full control over the property. Every mortgage payment would be directed from my account, and any attempt by Eric to interfere would trigger automatic legal reminders, calculated, undeniable, and humiliating. Second, I would leverage small-town gossip to my advantage. A few carefully dropped hints at the diner, a casual conversation with the local banker, and Eric's reputation as the arrogant, ungrateful son-in-law would start to crumble. But the pièce de résistance, the part that would make everyone in that family rethink underestimating me, was still in the works. I had discovered a loophole in the estate planning my ex-wife had handled before she passed. It wasn't public, not yet. But when executed correctly, it would shift the balance completely, exposing Eric's greed and entitlement while restoring my dignity and the house to me in a way that no one could argue against. That night, as I sat in my workshop with the smell of fresh sawdust around me, I allowed myself a rare smile. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice. Every insult, every mocking laugh, every condescending remark from Eric and the others would come back in a way they could never ignore. And the best part? They had no idea it was coming. I closed my eyes and imagined the look on Eric's face when he realized that the house, the mortgage, and the legacy he had mocked for years were about to slip out of his grasp. That look of shock, disbelief, and desperation, it was worth every ounce of patience I'd poured into this plan. The storm was coming. And this time, it wouldn't just be a cold Iowa wind. It would be my revenge, measured, precise, and unstoppable. The day of reckoning came sooner than Eric expected. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the town church on Main Street, where generations of Cedar Falls families had gathered, was packed. Today wasn't a wedding, birthday, or holiday. It was the reading of my ex-wife's will. I hadn't attended a reading in decades, but something about this one felt different. As I walked in, Eric spotted me immediately. His smirk faltered for the first time in weeks. Megan glanced nervously at her husband, clearly uneasy. The room smelled of polished wood, old hymnals, and faint perfume from the parishioners. The minister, Reverend Collins, stood at the front with the lawyer, Thomas Reynolds, at his side. Eric leaned toward Megan, whispering, "What is he doing here? This is just uncomfortable." I smiled calmly. "Yes, Eric," I said softly, loud enough for him to hear. "It is uncomfortable, for some of us." The lawyer cleared his throat. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Catherine Donnelly." The room hushed. Every eye turned toward me. I felt no fear, only the calm certainty of a man who knows what's coming. "First," Thomas said, "I'd like to address the Maple Street property. According to the terms outlined in this will and subsequent legal amendments, all rights, claims, and responsibilities remain with Frank Donnelly." Eric's jaw tightened. I could see the confusion, the disbelief. "What? That's not—" I held up a hand. "Shh. Let him finish, Thomas." Thomas continued, "Any attempt by Megan or her spouse, Eric, to interfere with the property, mortgage, or any financial instruments related to the house will be considered a breach of legal agreement. Furthermore, this breach will trigger immediate legal action, including reclaiming any funds paid toward the mortgage without authorization." A gasp rippled through the pews. Eric's face turned red, then pale. He stammered, "But you mocked me at dinner. You told me I didn't belong in my own house," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "And now, in front of everyone, you'll learn what happens when someone underestimates a man who spent a lifetime building more than just walls. He builds patience, knowledge, and legal leverage." The room went quiet again, the weight of my words sinking into every corner. Megan looked mortified, Eric flailing, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Then Thomas revealed the final twist. Additionally, according to a clause in the will, any inheritance previously assumed to be shared with Megan and Eric will now be allocated to a trust for Frank Donnelly. This includes liquid assets, personal property, and any financial instruments Catherine had set aside for the household. I watched Eric's smirk crumble into disbelief, then desperation. You can't do that. That's impossible." "It is possible," I said softly. My eyes locked on his. "And it's done. Every penny, every deed, every claim you thought was yours. Gone. Legally, morally, and publicly, it belongs where it should have all along." Neighbors whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads. Others stared openly, astonished at the drama unfolding. Small-town gossip was alive and electric in that room. Eric's embarrassment was palpable. He looked around, realizing that everyone knew him now, not as the charming husband, but as the arrogant man who underestimated his father-in-law. Megan tried to reach for me. "Dad, please, let's just—" "No," I said, softly but firmly. "This isn't personal. It's justice. Every insult, every laugh, every remark questioning my worth. This is the consequence. I am not just a name on a deed. I am a man who built, who sacrificed, and who refuses to be mocked in his own life." Eric's face twisted in anger. You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No, Eric. You're the one who underestimated me. That's your mistake. You can scream, shout, or cry, but the law and the people of Cedar Falls have already decided." And with that, I stepped back, the pews buzzing around me. I had no need for gloating. My dignity, my control, and my peace were restored. Eric had been exposed for what he was, entitled, arrogant, and reckless. Megan was silent, perhaps realizing the gravity of her complicity. As the crowd began to disperse, neighbors came over to shake my hand, pat my shoulder, some even murmuring words of quiet admiration. I felt a weight lift, a lifetime of sacrifice acknowledged in one moment. Walking out of the church, the Iowa sun was warm on my face. The Maple Street house, my home, my symbol of perseverance, was safe. Eric's arrogance was exposed, Megan's complacency tested. And for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. But even in victory, there's always the echo of lessons learned. Some people think power is loud, flashy, and immediate. Real power, the kind that lasts, is quiet, patient, and deliberate. And now, it belonged to me. I drove home slowly, letting the wind from the Iowa River buffet my old Chevy. Every mile, every turn reminded me, revenge isn't about hate. It's about restoring balance. And justice, when executed calmly and precisely, tastes sweeter than any roast ever could. Yet even as I closed the driveway gate behind me, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. There would be whispers in town, maybe even grudges. But for me, Frank Donnelly, life was back under my control. And that, finally, was all that mattered. The days after the will reading were strangely peaceful. Cedar Falls buzzed with gossip, of course, but I moved through it calmly, quietly, savoring the balance that had been restored. Eric's arrogance had been exposed, and Megan's eyes now carried a mixture of guilt and newfound respect. The Maple Street house remained mine, fully secured, and every legal and financial avenue I had meticulously prepared stood unchallenged. I spent one morning in my workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and linseed oil filling the room, and I reflected on everything that had happened. Life had a way of testing patience and resolve, often under the guise of betrayal. I had been insulted, humiliated, and dismissed. But I had survived. And more than surviving, I had won. Not through anger or rash action, but through strategy, calm, and perseverance. The first sign of real change came subtly. Eric tried to assert himself around town, attempting to regain some respect, but the community had already made its judgment. Neighbors who once admired his confidence now regarded him with skepticism. His name became synonymous with entitlement and arrogance, while mine carried a quiet weight of dignity and experience. Megan approached me one afternoon while I was repairing a fence in the backyard. "Dad, I wanted to apologize," she said softly, her hands twisting nervously. "I should have stood up sooner, instead of letting him mock you like that. I see now. What you built for me, for all of us, was never just a house. It was everything." I looked at her, not with anger, but with gentle resolve. "Megan, life will always test us. Sometimes people you love will disappoint you, but it's how you respond that defines your future. Remember that." She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. I placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture of reassurance, before returning to my work. The Maple Street house, with its creaking floors and sturdy beams, was more than a structure. It was a testament to endurance, sacrifice, and the unyielding spirit of a man who refused to be erased. Meanwhile, Eric's efforts to regain influence failed spectacularly. The local bank manager, Henry Collins, discreetly reminded him of his inability to legally interfere with the house. The neighbors whispered about the Sunday church confrontation, where his own smugness had led to public humiliation. Every move he made seemed to reinforce the image of the man who underestimated his father-in-law and lost. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the Iowa River. The smell of fresh grass mixed with the faint aroma of my workshop tools and the lingering scent of a warm summer breeze. I thought about the journey, the insults, the cold dinners, the whispered jabs, and the condescending laughter. All of it had led to this moment. Peace. I picked up my old leather-bound journal, flipping through notes and sketches from decades of carpentry and life lessons. It struck me then, as it had many times before, that dignity is rarely given. It must be earned and, when threatened, fiercely defended. And sometimes, defending it requires patience, strategy, and a quiet kind of fire. The poetic justice wasn't flashy. It didn't involve shouting matches or grand public spectacles beyond the will reading. It was in the subtle shifts. Eric's powerlessness, Megan's realization, the respect from neighbors who had witnessed the truth. It was in knowing that everything he had mocked, my home, my legacy, my perseverance, was intact, untarnished, and firmly in my hands. I leaned back in the rocking chair, letting the creak of the wood soothe me. The Maple Street house gleamed. In the evening light, a silent monument to years of sweat, struggle, and love. Every beam, every nail, every corner carried the story of my life. And now, it carried the story of triumph over disrespect, mockery, and arrogance. Life in Cedar Falls. Returned to a quiet rhythm, I resumed my carpentry work, fixing porches, building decks, and sharing small moments with Megan and the grandkids. Eric was a distant memory, his arrogance curtailed, his power diminished. Peace wasn't just restored, it was earned carefully, patiently, and legally. And as I closed the door to my workshop one evening, the warm glow of the setting sun reflecting off the Maple Street windows, I whispered to myself, some people think strength is in loud words or brash actions, but real strength, real justice, comes from patience, foresight, and the courage to act when the time is right. I sipped my coffee slowly, feeling the calm I hadn't known in decades. Every insult, every moment of humiliation had been transformed into a lesson, a reminder that life isn't about how others treat you. It's about how you respond, how you protect what's yours, and how you reclaim your dignity when it's challenged. Finally, I looked around at the home I had built, the life I had preserved, and the quiet town that had witnessed both insult and triumph. The Maple Street house stood tall and strong, a symbol of endurance, patience, and poetic justice. And in that moment, I knew one truth above all. I had not only reclaimed my home, my property, and my respect, but also my peace. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. The wind rustled the trees, the sun dipped lower, and Cedar Falls settled into the quiet evening. Justice had been served. Dignity had been restored. And Frank Donnelly, father, craftsman, survivor, was finally at peace.